Hi, my name's Eric, and I'll be reading you selections from the e-edition of today's Cape Cod Times. Today's date is Monday, March 10th of 2025. We'll start with the weather, as we always do, and across the Cape and Islands today. It's going to warm up this week a little bit. Maybe spring's on the way. Let's see. It's going to be milder with partial sunshine today, high of 49 expected and a low of 31 in the overnight, and clearing. Tomorrow, clear, breezy, plenty of sunshine, high of 50. Low of 41. Beautiful day for this time of year tomorrow. And Wednesday, sun and clouds mixed on Wednesday with a high of 51, low of 35 in the overnight. On Thursday, pretty much the same thing. A little more cloudy perhaps, high of 51, low of 39, but no rain expected. Same thing with Friday. Low clouds, high of 51, low of 38. So we have a week ahead in the 50s and in evenings in the high 30s ahead of us, which is not too bad. The sun will rise at 7:01 a.m. today. Hope you all jumped ahead with your clocks, sprang ahead an hour. If you haven't, make sure you do it, or when you look at it, you might not be looking at the right time. I made a mistake yesterday and almost launched our entire schedule a few minutes late because of looking at it and going, oh, it's early, and it wasn't early. So, just a reminder, we sprang ahead Sunday night. The sun will rise 7:01 a.m. today. It will set at 6:42 p.m. this afternoon or evening, and we'll have 11 hours, 41 minutes of daylight. The moon will rise at 3:04 p.m. and set at 5:32 a.m. Now, heading to the front of the paper, where the news, of course, and the lottery results are kept. And we read these lottery results because, well, somebody asked for them. If there's something you would like read to people who are blind or print disabled, you can email us at info@audiblelocalledger.org. It is audible, not audio. Audiblelocalledger.org. Or you can call us. That's often easier for many of our listeners. 508-539-2030. That's 508-539-2030. And we'll consider reading it. And if you miss any of the information that we share in our readings, you can always go to audiblelocalledger.org and click on the Listen tab. This is a fully disability-compliant website. Your screen readers will read it. Your accessibility options on either Macs or PCs should crawl throughout the page and tell you exactly what is on that page. And if you click on the Listen tab, you can find a week's worth of our newspapers that you can catch up on. Anything that you might have missed. And you'll find a wide variety of periodicals and literature up there for your listening pleasure. And they stay up there in perpetuity. We also keep our grocery guides up there so you know what's on sale at the supermarket. All that's free for people who are blind or print disabled at audiblelocalledger.org. For the latest lottery results, we go to masslottery.com, figuring that if you asked for them, you deserve the latest results, and the Cape Cod Times goes to press too early to give you those. So we will. The numbers game for Sunday, March 9th, in the midday drawing, the numbers were 3, 3, 5, 4. Yesterday's midday drawing numbers game, 3, 3, 5, 4. In the evening drawing of the numbers game, the results were 4, 4, 0, 8. Again, last night's evening drawing of the numbers game, 4408. Mass cash for Sunday, March 9th, 8, 15, 16, 24, and 34. And Lucky for Life rounds out our results for Sunday, March 9th with 6, 14, 18, 40, and 46, with 6, the bonus number. Good luck to all who play. Remember us if you win. And from the cover of today's Cape Cod Times, a light on seafaring heritage. Hyannis Cemetery project to restore more than 360 headstones of local captains and families by Heather McCarran in Hyannis. Tucked behind the Federated Church of Hyannis at 320 Main Street, the Universalist Cemetery, a hidden gem of Hyannis history, is set to receive a much-needed facelift. Starting later in March, work will get underway to restore and preserve the memorial stones within the nearly 200-year-old burial ground. the final resting place of sea captains and their families. Restoration work will take several months. The goal is to offer guided and self-guided tours to the public. Standing amid the tilting, lichen-covered gravestones as fog shrouded the steeple, church member Pam Brown on Thursday, March 6th, swept her gaze over the area and smiled. After 9 years of research and advocating, she's excited that the vision to preserve and revitalize the cemetery is coming to fruition. There are around 365 stones, but there are over 500 people buried here. A lot of the stones have multiple people on them, she said. A mission to preserve. Some of the memorials appear like new, but many others are stained, sunken, lay flat on the ground with grass growing over the edges, and are broken into chunks. Brown, who's an assistant clerk at the church, said years ago she discovered the only money that went into the cemetery was for mowing. I kept looking out the window of the sanctuary at the cemetery, she said, and I said, this is bad. She did something about it, starting with the lengthy process of getting the cemetery on the State Register of Historic Places and creating a preservation restriction for the site to ensure its permanent protection. In 2018, crews installed a fence with locking gates and closed the property at night to discourage its use as a hangout spot, Brown said. She said people met there to deal drugs, which made the cemetery vulnerable to vandalism. At times, people slept there and then used the grounds to relieve themselves. Last year, Fannin Lehner Preservation Consultants of Concord completed a detailed evaluation of the cemetery. That's a required first step toward developing a preservation plan. Last fall, the Barnstable Community Preservation Committee unanimously recommended spending money to spruce up the cemetery. In January, the Town Council unanimously supported spending $164,000 in community preservation money for that purpose. During a January 30th presentation to the Council, Preservation Committee Vice Chairman Tom Lee emphasized the cemetery's significance as an historical burial ground of sea captains and early residents of Hyannis dating to 1830 that serves as a testament to the village's seafaring heritage. Without the CPA funds, this wouldn't be possible at all. It would just continue to deteriorate, said Brown. The town chose Atlas Preservation of Southington, Connecticut to undertake the project, and work will begin as soon as the weather allows. That work calls for restoring 270 gravestones identified in the 2024 evaluation as needing attention. Atlas Preservation will also clean all of the stones and install 16 posts to mark the cemetery's 4 sections. Last October, a stolen vehicle crashed into the cemetery and knocked over 2 memorials, Brown said. Atlas completed the repairs, which Brown told the council in January, gave us the opportunity to conduct a pilot project where we could observe the excellent work of this conservator. Stories among the stones. The cemetery is open daily. Visitors are welcome. Located about 50 feet from Elm Avenue and bordered by the church buildings to the south and east, it is easy to miss, but its significance is undeniable, serving as the final resting place of at least 36 sea captains and mariners and at least 17 veterans of the Civil War, including 38-year-old Ebenezer Eldridge, who died on May 12, 1864, 4 days into the second major engagement of the war in Spotsylvania, Virginia. Several stones in the cemetery, called cenotaphs, record names of those lost at sea, serving only as memorials rather than burial sites. Brown said the first church on the property was the Universalist Church, built in 1830. In 1917, parishioners joined with the Congregationalists to form the Federated Church of Hyannis. Townspeople established the burial ground 4 years earlier than the church. The oldest gravestone, dated July 10, 1826, belongs to Caroline Simmons. Featuring a willow motif, the stone was carved by Nathaniel Holmes, Cape Cod's first resident gravestone carver, who carved about 25 of the stones in the cemetery. Just over 18 months of age when she died, Caroline was the daughter of Sea Captain Lemuel B. Simmons and his wife Temperance, whose 1820 homestead still stands on Scudder Avenue near the junction with Pitcher's Way. Captain Simmons had a brief moment in the spotlight. He oversaw the first no-rum ship to leave an American port on a foreign voyage, refusing to provide his crew with rum or rum money, as was customary, Brown said. A memorial to Horatio Simmons. Brown, a member of the Association of Gravestone Studies, has a favorite among the stones, a memorial to Horatio Simmons that features an intricate carving of a tall ship. Horatio was just 19 when he died in 1855 and was buried at sea off Cape Horn. Another memorial that captures Brown's imagination is that of Ori Sampson Jr., who died during the Korean War. There are no remains buried under his stone, she said, but whenever she hears stories about remains of American soldiers being identified and returned home, I'm always curious if they'll find him. From the State House News Service, the headline reads, "Concerns over federal funds aired in state legislative hearing." This is reported by Sam Drysdale of the State House News Service. With unusually high levels of uncertainty circling around the federal funding that buoys more than $16 billion of the state budget, Governor Maura Healey's finance secretary said Thursday that federal cuts would be too big of a problem for the executive branch to solve on its own. "We're going to have to sit down collectively and do it because I can tell you the problem's going to be too big for any one branch to think that they'll have a proposal to solve it," Administration and Finance Secretary Matthew Gorkowicz said during a budget hearing before the Ways and Means Committees on Thursday. Gorkowicz added it's going to require legislation. It's going to require perhaps looking at appropriations and looking at resources. Maybe we have to reallocate resources differently than we have in the past, but the executive branch is not going to have the ability to do it all. The state has more than $8 billion stocked away in a rainy day fund, but state tax collections continue to rise, and Senate Ways and Means Chairman Michael Rodrigues indicated last week that he may hesitate to tap into it even in light of federal cuts. "We must forego any immediate temptation that may hurt our state's long-term economic health, while carefully identifying and assessing areas of concerns where we, as a Commonwealth, may need to shoulder the burden in the absence of federal support," Rodrigues said. Concerns about federal revenues at first budget meeting. Serious concerns over the federal revenues that support state spending were a major theme of the first annual budget hearing, which also touched on the new normal of moderate revenue growth similar to pre-pandemic levels, and cost growth exceeding inflation in several areas of government spending. President Donald Trump sent shockwaves throughout state government when he announced in January that he would freeze federal grants and other congressionally approved government programs. The administration rescinded the memo that froze federal financial assistance, and it was then blocked by 2 federal judges. But the administration is focused on downsizing government and says it still plans to revisit that plan in the future. We're stepping back and we're taking a more comprehensive look and trying to just understand, based on proposals that are being advanced from Washington, what the impact on the state will be, Gorkowicz told reporters after the budget hearing Thursday. He continued, "As you can imagine, those proposals are changing, and it's been difficult to try to get information about some of the details behind those proposals. But we're working with the cabinet. We're working with all levels of government to just understand what those proposals might be, to try to run some scenarios and some modeling to understand that impact." The finance secretary said there might not be much the state can do to make up for lost federal funding. And let's be clear, there may not be the ability to backstop much of what we're seeing, but to the extent that we have to look at existing resources or make changes, we're going to need the partnership with the legislature to do that. They have the power to legislate and appropriate, he said. On disbanding the U.S. Department of Education, Healey referred several times over the course of the hearing to reports on Thursday that Trump may sign an executive order to disband the U.S. Department of Education. Doing so, she said, would cut funding for students in Massachusetts who reserve special education services, Title I grants for low-income families, and other education dollars in Bay State schools. We, as a state, are not going to be able to absorb or make up for cuts that come from a federal administration, She told reporters about the possible elimination of the Department of Education. Earlier, she said, so it's just to say we've got to keep real-time awareness in terms of what's out there, what's coming down, whether it's by executive order or some other like doji, whatever, exercise. Healy and her team weren't the only ones concerned about federal funding cuts affecting the state budget. This committee also has to build a budget for the looming fear of what might come next from the federal government. That's unpredictable, to put it mildly, said House Ways and Means Chairman Aaron Miklowitz. He continued, it's our job to cut out the noise, no matter how loud that may be, and produce a budget that provides the services that our constituents rely upon, while also being ready to pivot if necessary. All hands on deck moment. Miklowitz's counterpart in the Senate, Michael Roderick, said it's all hands on deck moment due to threats from Washington to cut federal funding in areas like healthcare and education, or tariffs that will drive up the cost of delivery for our residents. While budget writers try to anticipate possible federal actions, they're also contending with a return to modest revenue growth after several years of substantial collections that coincided with big state spending increases. Revenue collections in fiscal year 2025 have outperformed expectations, and budget writers plan for more growth in fiscal 2026. But tax collections have still flattened compared to years when state coffers were injected with billions of pandemic-related federal grants. We know that revenues, despite the early pandemic, have plateaued. They'll return to slower, more steady growth, consistent with the way tax collections worked pre-pandemic, Roderick said. It's crucial that we exercise fiscal discipline. We remain vigilant and course correct when prudent. Despite slowing revenue growth, Healy's budget maintains popular pandemic-era programs that were originally paid for with COVID-related dollars from the federal government, including $475 million in grants for early education and care providers and $170 million for universal free school meals. During the pandemic, the federal government also expanded Medicaid eligibility, which brought more Bay Staters onto the rolls of its Mass Health program. That was followed by an eligibility redetermination effort that reduced enrollment. 5 years later, though, enrollment in Mass Health stands at about 2.2 million, 260,000 more members than it had at the beginning of the pandemic. Gorkowicz referred to Mass Health's inflated rolls several times over the course of his testimony on Thursday, pointing out that public insurance program is the most expensive line item in the budget. Additionally, Mass Health members' acuity is much higher, he said. There are a few things that are growing greater than the rate of inflation. And when I say greater than the rate of inflation, I mean 2 or 3 times greater than the rate of inflation. But there are also things that we've made priorities, whether it's the Student Opportunity Act, Mass Health, K-12 universal meals, early education and care grants. These are things that are putting pressure on the budget, but things collectively that over the last 5 years we've made priorities, he said. Republicans in Washington are looking at major spending cuts in Medicaid, which could sever revenue supports for Mass Health, forcing state officials to reevaluate the massive program. To keep up with spending priorities, Healy's budget relies on about $1 billion in one-time revenues, though the administration says it plans to mitigate that by replenishing some trust funds and reserves. Representative John Marcy of Dudley asked about the sustainability of relying on one-time sources of revenue and planning for a possible future where tax collections don't keep up with state spending. Gorkowicz responded that his team constructed the budget with fiscal years 27 and 2028 in mind, and reiterated they have a plan to replenish some of the reserves through shuffling money that's available in trust funds. He added, however, that next budget year, they'll have to be deliberate and thoughtful about how much spending is sustainable. As we go into 27, we have to start thinking about what's sustainable and what is reasonable, given the revenue environment we're in, he said. So we are very aware of the use of one-timers and very deliberate and thoughtful about how we plan to grow out of those one-timers in 27 and 28, or again, replenish them, so that we have a multi-year approach toward balancing the budget. A social justice project at Barnstable County Jail is our next headline. This is written by Desiree McFargen of the Cape Cod Times. The Barnstable County Sheriff's Office is introducing the Frederick Douglass Project for Social Justice to the Barnstable County Correctional Facility in Bourne, according to a press release. Piloting March 25th, the project was introduced with hopes to correct misconceptions that incarcerated individuals are fundamentally different from everyone else, according to Barnstable County Sheriff Donna Buckley. The project was founded in 2019 by Mark Howard, a professor at Georgetown University whose childhood friend was wrongfully convicted for a double murder, according to the release. Howard will be attending and leading discussions at the pilot event. 20 members of the community will have the chance to meet with 20 incarcerated individuals at the correctional facility, according to the press release. The pilot will include an orientation and tour of the facility, facilitated introductions, and small group conversations with dinner. The average incarceration period for someone in the county's correctional facility is less than a year, according to the release. Most of the people jailed here will soon return to society, and their successful rehabilitation depends on citizens who understand their challenges, said Buckley in the release. Community members interested in participating in the pilot can sign up through the Frederick Douglass Project for Justice website at www.douglassproject.org, www.douglassproject.org, with Douglas having 2 S's. Unemployment claims in the state have decreased. Initial filings for unemployment benefits in Massachusetts dropped for the week ending March 1st compared with the week prior, the U.S. Department of Labor said on Thursday. New jobless claims, which is a proxy for layoffs, fell to 5,267 in the week ending March 1st. That's down from 9,256 the week before, the Labor Department said. U.S. unemployment claims dropped to 221,000 last week. That's down 21,000 claims from the 242,000 the week prior on a seasonally adjusted basis. New Hampshire saw the largest percentage increase in weekly claims, with claims jumping by 124%. Rhode Island, meanwhile, saw the largest percentage drop in new claims, with claims dropping by 67%. Contest asks students to write a PSA on roadway safety by Seth Jacobson. Massachusetts is trying to make the roads safer for young drivers. The Mass Department of Transportation, known as Mass DOT, along with the global nonprofit group Fundación MAPFRE, is hosting its 3rd annual Roadway Safety Public Service Contest for high school students in the Bay State. Mass DOT is excited to renew our partnership with Fundación MAPFRE for the 3rd annual Roadway Safety Education Contest, Transportation Secretary and CEO Monica Tibbetts-Nutt said in a written statement. Engaging young drivers in safety education is a crucial step in our mission to enhance road safety, and we look forward to seeing the innovative ideas that students will present this year. Their participation is vital to our efforts to create a future free of roadway injuries and fatalities. Here's what to know about the contest. Well, how does it work? Students are being asked to write a script for a TV commercial that promotes safer driving, according to the contest website. This public service announcement will save lives by reminding all people, especially young drivers, to drive safely. When's the deadline for entries? Friday, March 21st. And what do the winners receive? According to the contest website, winners will work with the Boston Creative Communications Agency, known as CTP, to produce the commercial, which is anticipated to air in the spring before prom and graduation season. The winning student's school will also receive a $3,000 prize provided by Fundación MAPFRE. And to enter the contest, high schools can visit www.fundacionmapfre.org/en/look-both-ways. So fundacionmapfre.org/n/look-both-ways. Moving into the Cape and Islands section as we keep it local here, trout stocking will start this month by Seth Jacobson. Mass Wildlife is about to stock many lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams with an abundant supply of trout. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, now's the perfect time to grab your gear and license, find a stocked water body near you, and experience the thrill of reeling in a fresh catch, Mass Wildlife said on its website. Here's more about what's happening. What kind of trout is being stocked by Mass Wildlife? The fish include brook, brown, rainbow, and tiger trout. Just 10 years ago, less than 60% of stocked trout were over 12 inches. Now, over 80% measure over a foot, according to Mass Wildlife. How many bodies of water are being stocked? Mass Wildlife stated on its website that 458 lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams in 264 Massachusetts cities and towns will be stocked with the trout. Anglers can see what water bodies have been stocked and a schedule of when they will be stocked on Mass Wildlife's website. When is it set to begin? A week in March. It doesn't say which one, according to Mass Wildlife. I believe there was a typo here somewhere because it's missing the number. How does Mass Wildlife stock the bodies of water? They raise trout at its 5 hatcheries in Sandwich, Palmer, Belchertown, Sunderland, and Montague, according to the agency's website. How can people find a place to fish near them? Well, you can check out the mass.gov/trout to find a fishing spot and to find updates on bodies of water that have been stocked. Do you need a license to fish in fresh water? Yes, and you can buy one at Mass Fish Hunt or by visiting a licensed vendor location. Prices start at around $36 for state residents, but they can cost upwards of $46 for those who don't live in Massachusetts. The other story in the Cape and Islands is from the photo editor, Steve Heslip, the photo shoot column. And you may ask, why do we read the photo shoot column to blind people? It's because he doesn't really just talk about how to take a picture or, hey, look at this picture. It's more about his experience in taking the picture, and that certainly can apply to anybody. Finding a Cape Spring with Walk That Is Measured and Slow by Steve Heslip. The first line of Shel Silverstein's poem, Where the Sidewalk Ends, is, "There is a place where the sidewalk ends and before the street begins." He continues, "Yes, we will walk with a walk that is measured and slow." The poem was a favorite of my kids. I reconnected with it last week after a long time away. As the long month of March gets underway, with its 31 days of lion and lamb weather patterns, taking a measured and slow approach might be a good remedy. There's no reason to rush, especially after losing an hour to daylight savings time. It's a long haul until Eastern Standard Time arrives on November 2nd with the return of our lost hour. My goal for March, walk more, drive less. Not easy for a photojournalist tasked daily with covering the Cape from one end to the other. Every journey starts with a first step, and it was time to see where the sidewalk would lead. Sure enough, about 15 minutes into the walk, the sidewalk ended and an old granite wall rose up, both following the contours of the rambling pathway called Old Kings Highway, now paved over and renamed Route 6A, with a speed limit of 30 miles per hour. In between walkway and wall, a single crocus had managed to take root. The south-facing frontage coaxed it into full bloom, soaking in late afternoon sunshine. Its sleepy cousins nowhere to be found in the underbrush atop the 4-foot-high wall. Photographing this brave bloom required some acrobatics, getting the lens down to its level. Technology to the rescue. The camera's articulated LCD screen tilts up 90 degrees, so the aging photographer didn't have to lay on his stomach to peer through the viewfinder. The afternoon rush hour was in full swing on the highway. Windy wakes from passing cars rustled the delicate plant. Taillights blurred out of sight, heading west. I'm sure no one noticed this small early spring display just outside their windows. The winter days of March are off to a slow start, but spring presents itself in small ways if you stop and take a look. We're at the midway point of our reading of today's Cape Cod Times, dated March 10th of 2025, a Monday. Regular listeners are aware that in the middle of our readings is when we move to the obituaries if they're listed, if there are any listed in that paper. In today's Cape Cod Times, there are 2 obituaries. The first is of Ronald W. Anderson, a veteran. Ronald Rocky Anderson of Borndale passed peacefully surrounded by his loving family on Wednesday, March 5th, 2025, at the age of 92. Rocky was born on September 9th, 1932, in Bourne. A lifelong resident of Bourne, Rocky graduated from Bourne High School and went on to earn a degree from Wentworth Institute of Technology. He served as an X-ray technician for the U.S. Army before embarking on a distinguished career with IBM, covering Cape Cod and the islands. Ronald's work ethic was unmatched, retiring without missing a single day. Ronald was a master craftsman, skilled in finish carpentry. His craftsmanship and meticulous attention to detail were evident in every project he undertook. An avid outdoorsman, he cherished his time fishing on his boat, exploring the waters he loved so deeply. A devoted genealogist, Ronald dedicated much of his life to tracing his family's roots, proudly connecting his lineage to 2 passengers on the Mayflower. This discovery was among his proudest accomplishments, reflecting his deep passion for family history. Active in his community, Ronald served as president of the Borndale Civic Association and was a member of the Bourne Historical Society, the Bourne Society for Historic Preservation, the Bourne Capital Outlay Committee, the Bourne Finance Committee, Sagamore Cemetery Association, and the Finnish-American Society of Cape Cod. As a committed member of the Masonic community and a proud Shriner, Ronald was affiliated with the DeWitt Clinton Lodge in Sandwich and its affiliate, the Conicombe Sunshine Lodge in Bourne. His involvement with these organizations showcased his dedication to their values and missions. Ronald was one of 9 children raised in Borndale. He is survived by his loving children and many family and friends. Ronald will be deeply missed by all who knew him. He'll be remembered for his dedication to his family, his community, and the history that shaped them. Friends and family are invited to gather and honor Ronald's remarkable life at a memorial visitation that will take place at Nickerson Bourne Funeral Home, located at 40 MacArthur Boulevard in Bourne, on March 12th from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. That would be this Wednesday. A graveside service and a celebration of life will be announced at a later date. In lieu of flowers, any donations may be made to the Bourne Historical Society, a cause close to his heart. The other obituary in today's Cape Cod Times is of Joanne Jensen. Joanne Fullerton Jensen was born March 2nd, 1942. She was called to her eternal rest on March 6th, 2025. She was the loving wife of Richard E. Jensen for 64 years. Her greatest desire in life was to see her children, grandchildren, and her siblings come to know the Lord in a personal way. The visiting hours will be held this Thursday, March 13th, from 4 to 7 p.m. at Nickerson Bourne's Funeral Home at 40 MacArthur Boulevard in Bourne. A funeral service will take place at 11 a.m. this Friday, March 14th, at the Bourne Methodist Church, 37 Sandwich Road in Bourne, and the burial will be private. And that concludes the obituaries and death notices listed in the Cape Cod Times for today, Monday, March 10th. And for those listening who still might have some vision, How to See This Week's Lunar Eclipse in Massachusetts by Seth Jacobson. A total lunar eclipse will be visible in Massachusetts next week, and it's going to be extra unique. The eclipse will coincide with a March full moon, creating dramatic viewing. The event is sometimes called a blood moon, as the Earth moving between the sun and the moon can cause a red cast as light moves through our planet's atmosphere. The celestial event, which will see the moon change to rusty red hues, will occur in the U.S. on the night of March 13th and 14th. According to NASA, another total lunar eclipse won't be visible in the U.S. until March of 2026. With the upcoming skyward event, people viewing the full moon may also catch a glimpse of a rare sight called a moonbow. Here's what to know about the upcoming total lunar eclipse and when you can see it happen. Is Massachusetts in the path of totality? Massachusetts is in the path of totality for the upcoming lunar eclipse. The entire Western Hemisphere will have a view, according to the website Date and Time. This is the first time a lunar eclipse has been visible over Massachusetts since 2022. When can the blood moon and eclipse be seen in March? Its peak viewing time will be, well, you'll have to stay up and be very excited at 2:55 a.m. on March 14th, but it can be seen earlier that night on March 13th as well. Here's a schedule of how it will unfold according to NASA, because that sounds a little confusing what I just read. At 11:57 p.m. Eastern Time, you can see the eclipse starting when the penumbral phase begins as the moon enters the outer part of the shadow, and it begins to subtly dim. At 1:09 a.m., a partial eclipse begins as the moon enters Earth's umbra and starts to darken. To the naked eye, the moon should look like a bite is being taken out of the lunar disk. At 2:26 a.m., totality occurs when the entire moon is under the umbra. This is when the reddish hues of the blood moon will be on display. At 3:31 a.m., as the moon exits the umbra, the red color will fade and another bite-like display, this time on the other side of the moon, will appear. And at 6 a.m., the entire process should end, as the moon slowly exits the Earth's penumbra. Will a moonbow be visible during the lunar eclipse? A moonbow is a rare rainbow-like light display that's caused by moonlight refracting through water droplets in the air. Also known as a lunar rainbow, moonbows are usually faint and appear white to the naked eye, according to the Dark Sky International website. It's possible the eclipse will present a chance to see one. The best time to look for the moonbow is right after sunset on March 14th when the sky goes dark, according to Dark Sky International. When is the next total lunar eclipse after this upcoming one? That is September 8th of 2025, according to the Farmer's Almanac, but don't make any plans to see it if you live in North America. The Farmer's Almanac said, unfortunately, North and South America will not see this total lunar eclipse because the moon will be below the horizon, and it'll be daytime when this eclipse takes place. The next one visible in the U.S. will be in March of 2026. So don't circle September 8th of 2025 on your calendar, because if you're in the Western Hemisphere, you won't see it. But you will see this one coming up on in this week, which would be on March 14th. Today is the 10th, so that's Thursday. Something to look forward to if you do have a little bit of vision. And you feel like staying up and you're an insomniac, maybe. I think all of those would help in this venture. And we'll keep it local and move into sports now because it is becoming tournament time. With a big game from Reagan Blake, Bourne punches a Final Four ticket by Adam Kirkjian of the Cape Cod Times. At 8:30 in the morning Saturday, Bourne girls basketball coach Stephen Wenzel received a text message from one of his players, Reagan Blake. "Let's go," it read. "That's when I knew she was ready," Wenzel said of his team's Division IV Elite 8 showdown with number 5 Cohasset later that day. And Wenzel was right. Blake was ready, and boy did she ever show it. Riding a stellar performance from Blake and everyone else in purple, the number 4 Canalman earned a 48-34 win to advance to the state semifinals over my home high school. Yes, this is your reader, Eric. I grew up in Cohasset, so they beat my team. Wenzel did not know for sure, but said this might be Bourne's first state semifinal trip in 40-plus years. Blake finished with 15 points. Paige Mita led with 18 points, but Blake's contributions were a little more unexpected. The junior's one of the best rebounders in any given game, and she's also a top defender. Her versatility is valuable. But scoring? That's not always her role. Blake's fine with that. But in a game where points were at a premium, she stepped up in a way that really helped her team rally from a 4-point halftime deficit. The type of player Reagan is, she does anything for her team, Wenzel said. She knows her role. She can play all 5 positions. Some days she'll be a forward, and some days she'll handle the basketball. Some days, like Saturday, she'll be more aggressively scoring. The place it showed up the most was in the third quarter with the game hanging in the balance. She normally scores from the low block, but with their team down 26-24, Blake drilled a straightaway three-pointer as the home crowd erupted. It marked the first lead of the game for the Canalmen, who didn't trail again. Blake also added a putback off a missed Bourne three-pointer. Again, the crowd went nuts, and Bourne truly seized the momentum from there and didn't let go. We definitely needed to get on a roll, Blake said. My passes weren't good. I definitely needed to score. I think after that first layup or 3 that I had, I decided to keep going with it, and then I just got locked in and started scoring more. The explosion from the crowd at those points energized the whole Bourne team. Even though Mita tends to lead the Canalmen in scoring most games, Blake is in this one, and junior Nola Timo in the previous playoff game show off how much depth this team has. I definitely think the baskets hyped the crowd and team, Blake said. It energized me too, for sure. Made me want to do more for the team. The crowd, they were getting loud. It definitely helped the team out a lot. Those points and that momentum were huge. With McKinley Wenzel having 6 points, still recovering from the flu, Bourne needed more points from everyone else. Blake was happy to oblige and found her groove. She validated her mood from earlier when she sent her coach that text. I was so excited because I know a lot of girls were sick, and we made it to the Elite 8 last year and we lost by 3, Blake said. This year, we had a home game and we saw an opportunity. We had to take the opportunity and give a good show out for the community. I'm happy we got to do that. Mita is 5'5" and an energizer bunny with the ball in her hands. She's a terrific scorer, defender, and leader of a very good team. It's hard not to notice the beating she takes from opposing defenses. Mita attacked the paint a lot Saturday, especially in the second half. Over and over, she took big shots from the defense. It felt like she was always on the ground. Each time, Mita answered the bell, got up, and came back for more. Her skill is tremendous, but so is her attitude and leadership on a team full of both. Paige is the best player around, Wenzel said. Pound for pound, Paige is the best player around, the toughest player around. And we've exhausted all of our local news. We will now move into the national set of news. Moving back to the front page, Secret Service shoots man near White House. And if you're wondering why we do local news first, it's because the local news is stuff you can't get on commercial radio or TV. You're not going to know your town meeting times. You're not going to hear about gravestones being refinished on local commercials. You're not going to hear the high school sports. You might get that on a local radio station, but not much. And so we try to give you, to fill in the blanks, the gaps that commercial radio and TV don't give you. Or maybe if you don't have somebody visiting you every day telling you who may have passed or who you knew that wasn't feeling well, we're here to try and fill in those blanks for you. So that's why we start with local. We exhaust all local before we move to national. National news you can get from many, many places. But if you are just listening to our radio broadcast, we do want to give you the national news. It's just probably not the priority compared to local. And with that, the Secret Service shoots a man near the White House is our headline from the front page of today's Cape Cod Times dated March 10th. This is reported by John Bacon of USA Today. Secret Service personnel shot an armed man near the White House early on Sunday, hours after obtaining information that a suicidal man might be traveling to Washington, D.C. from Indiana, authorities said. Secret Service spokesperson Anthony Guglielmi said in a statement that the shooting took place following an armed confrontation with law enforcement. The statement said Secret Service members found the man's parked vehicle around midnight and saw a man on foot matching the description nearby. As officers approached, the individual brandished a firearm and an armed confrontation ensued, during which shots were fired by our personnel, the statement said. The suspect was taken to an area hospital. His condition was not immediately made available, the statement said. No other injuries were reported. President Donald Trump was out of town, according to the White House schedule. The incident was under investigation by the Metropolitan Police Department Internal Affairs Division's Force Investigations Team, which investigates all law enforcement officer-involved shootings in the District of Columbia. The shooting comes about a month after a man was taken into custody after attempting to scale the White House South Lawn fence. On February 3rd at around 4:20 p.m., Secret Service officers responded to reports of someone climbing an outer fence along the south grounds of the White House. Video posted on social media showed the man, clad in black, climbing to the top of the fence as dogs on White House grounds ran toward the fence. The man slid back down on the outside of the fence as officers arrived, put him on the ground, cuffed him, and took him into custody. President Trump was in the White House that day. The agency came under intense scrutiny after a failed assassination attempt at a July rally in Pennsylvania that wounded Trump, killed one rally-goer, and seriously wounded two others before the gunman was fatally shot. Multiple investigations into the Secret Service response to that shooting faulted the agency for failing to stop a preventable attack. In January, President Donald Trump picked the head of his personal security detail, who rushed to protect him during the assassination attempt, to lead the Secret Service. Sean Curran was among the agents who leaped up to protect Trump after a bullet grazed his ear. Sean is a great patriot who's protected my family over the past few years, and that's why I trust him to lead the brave men and women of the United States Secret Service, Trump said in a statement announcing Curran's selection to the post. What happens if the government closes the Department of Education? Most functions would need to be moved to other federal agencies. This is reported by Zachary Shermley in Washington. As President Donald Trump continues his campaign to gut federal agencies, one of his favorite targets has been the Department of Education, which he's vowed to close. Education Secretary Linda McMahon confirmed Friday on Fox News that Trump clearly intends to sign an order targeting her department. As talk of imminent change brews, millions of students, parents, teachers, administrators, and support staff might be wondering what exactly the Department of Education does and doesn't do, and how looming cuts to the agency could impact daily life. They might also be asking whether such cuts are even lawful. For starters, the department doesn't decide what kids learn. It has no control over school curricula, and it's not forcing teachers to teach anything. Sending education back to the states, which Trump has repeatedly called for, is a bit like mandating the sun go back to the sky. Well, it's already there. The federal government does, of course, have some broad authority over what goes on in the classroom environment. No educational program that receives federal funding, which includes K-12 schools, all public and some private, and colleges, all public and many private, can allow discrimination against students. The Education Department is legally required to ensure that students and teachers with disabilities are treated fairly, and that low-income schools get the resources they need to keep pace with more affluent ones. The agency also issues regulations for colleges to hold them accountable for preparing graduates for well-paying jobs. And it functions like a giant bank, doling out billions of dollars to help people pay for college. Here are answers to some of the most commonly asked questions about the Education Department. Can Trump axe a federal agency? The Constitution gives Congress the power to pass laws and directs the president to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Because the department was created by Congress, Trump cannot close it on his own. McMahon said at her confirmation hearing she understands the need to work with Congress to downsize the agency and create a better functioning Department of Education. Many of the offices within the department were also established by law, so legislation would be needed to close them or transfer their functions to other agencies. Can Congress close it? Congress could abolish the department through a new law, but given the GOP's slim margins in the Senate, the likelihood of passing such legislation is slim. At least 7 Democrats would have to go along with such a vote, which is highly unlikely. A more likely scenario is that Congress could pass legislation to reorganize the agency's various functions, relocating them elsewhere within the government. But even that situation would require Democrats to get on board, which probably won't happen. So, what about financial aid? Though Trump has promised to shutter the agency, its functions would have to stick around. Why? Well, because there are laws in place that created them. And technically, those laws should keep federal financial aid safe. Even if the Education Department were reorganized, which would take an act of Congress, its obligations under Title IV of the Higher Education Act of 1965 would have to continue elsewhere. The law requires the government to administer student loan programs, issue grants, and ensure that schools receiving federal money don't discriminate against students. To comply, Congress would have to pass a law putting another agency in charge of dispersing things like Pell Grants, which help lower-income students pay for college. Federal student loans, like other forms of federal financial aid, will continue to be dispersed as long as Congress keeps the programs around. However, the Federal Student Aid Office, which Trump has proposed relocating to the Small Business Administration, has already lost key staff members amid layoffs and buyouts. Whether those departures will have ripple effects that impact students is unclear, though career staffers and student advocates have expressed concerns. Would FAFSA be affected? The free application for federal student aid suffered from delays and glitches after an overhaul by former President Joe Biden's administration that ultimately made the online form simpler and more accessible to more applicants. The FAFSA, which must be submitted to get federal financial aid, theoretically wouldn't be affected if the Education Department were shuttered, as long as the people who oversee it were shifted to another agency. But again, it's unclear right now whether staff turnover in the department or an attempt to move the Federal Student Aid Office to a different agency would create downstream problems for students. Transferring that office, which last year employed more than 1,400 people with an array of expertise, would also be a massive undertaking. It could stretch out over months, probably years. What about college funding? Colleges are already losing federal funding, but it's not tied to the Education Department closing. The Trump administration has taken other steps to diminish financial support for campuses, including altering research funding. A policy shift at the National Institutes of Health that would collectively strip institutions of billions of dollars was put on hold by a federal judge Wednesday. Federal agencies have continued to abruptly cancel and threaten contracts and grants for colleges, forcing some campuses to issue hiring freezes or pause graduate admissions. Would a closure affect disability accommodations? Some educational services are mandated by law and remain protected. Public schools are required under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to provide a free, appropriate public education to all students with disabilities. However, it may become harder to file complaints. The Education Department's Office for Civil Rights has resumed investigations into disability-related complaints, but only after a month-long pause left families and advocates in the lurch. During her Senate confirmation hearing, McMahon floated the idea of moving disability rights enforcement to the Health and Human Services Department, which is overseen by Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. Catherine Lahman, who led civil rights enforcement in schools during the Biden administration, denounced the idea in a recent interview. That transition, even in the best scenario, will cost kids time, she said, and we don't have time. Our next headline, doctors push back amid measles outbreak. Texas parents embrace Kennedy and vitamin A, by Chad Terhune of Reuters. As a measles outbreak spreads across West Texas, Dr. Anna Montanez is fighting an uphill battle to convince some patients and parents that vitamin A touted by vaccine critics as effective against the highly contagious virus, will not protect their children. This is voodoo medicine. Vitamin A will not protect your child. The 53-year-old pediatrician in the city of Lubbock is working overtime to contact vaccine-hesitant parents, explaining the grave risks posed by a disease most American families have never seen in their lifetime, and one that can be easily prevented through immunization. Increasingly, however, she has to counter misleading information. One mother, she said, told her she was giving her 2 children high doses of vitamin A to ward off measles, and that was based on an article posted by Children's Health Defense, which is an anti-vaccine group led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. nearly a decade before he became President Donald Trump's top health official. Wait, what are you doing? That was a red flag, Montanez said. This is a tight community, and I think if one family does one thing, everybody else is going to follow. So even if I can't persuade you to vaccinate, I can at least educate you on misinformation. Kennedy resigned as chairman of Children's Health Defense and has said he has no power over the organization, which is sued in state and federal courts to challenge common vaccines, including for measles, as was brought up in his confirmation hearing. The organization did not respond to a request for comment. As Health and Human Services Secretary, Kennedy has said vaccinations remain a personal choice. He's also overstated the evidence for use of treatments such as vitamin A, according to disease experts. The supplement does not prevent measles, and it can be harmful to children in large or prolonged doses, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's been shown to decrease the severity of measles infections in developing countries among patients who are malnourished and vitamin A deficient. That's a rare occurrence in the U.S. I'm very concerned about the messaging coming out, said Dr. Jeffrey Kahn, chief of infectious diseases at Children's Health in Dallas. It's somewhat baffling to me that we're relitigating the effectiveness of vaccines and alternative therapies. We know how to handle measles. We've had 60 years of experience. Andrew Nixon, a Department of Health and Human Services spokesperson, didn't respond to questions about Kennedy's handling of the measles outbreak. But commenting on a measles-related death in New Mexico, Nixon said on Thursday the U.S. CDC recommends vaccination as the best protection against measles infection. Texas officials said Friday the state's measles outbreak had grown to 198 cases, including 23 hospitalized people, which include the death of an unvaccinated school-aged child at a Lubbock hospital last month. They could have saved his life if they had vaccinated him. His parents are responsible for that. New Mexico officials have tallied 30 cases and 1 death of an unvaccinated adult. Those are the first deaths from measles in the U.S. since 2015. A 29-year-old nurse who's the mother of 3 and is a self-described Kennedy fan visited Montanez's clinic on Thursday. She asked to be identified as Nicole C., her middle name and last initial, to protect her family's privacy, and said she values the doctor's advice and appreciated that she never felt judged for not fully vaccinating her school-aged daughter and toddler twins, a boy and a girl, with a second dose of the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. After the initial shots, she said she grew more concerned about potential side effects from vaccines and embraced more natural supplements. She said school officials told her that her daughter would have to miss 21 days of class if she remains under-vaccinated and was exposed to measles. The risk of contact in Lubbock is real. Montanez called about a dozen families last month because they were exposed to measles in her own waiting room, which she shares with other doctors in the Texas Tech Physicians Group. And with that, disturbing news to me, a doctor's son, we've come to the end of our reading of the Cape Cod Times for March 10th, the Monday of 2025. This is your reader, Eric, saying be well, be safe, look after each other, get your vaccines. Remember our veterans, especially those we've lost recently. Bye for now.